several days ago, someone said we should be moved in church. Well, we are
Be moved in church. I'm going to invite everyone to speak as loudly as you're able. Actually, no, we won't go through the microphone thing. That's a bit distracting. Other reactions to what you've just seen?
Fabulous. I love you to send the link, and I was thinking of all the people I'm going to send it to.
Yeah. It'll be on my site tomorrow.
Okay.
Same thing, simple but incredibly powerful.
There we go.
Okay.
I
Fran?
loved her message of, you will be there to take care of my child, and I'm not there.
The image of the darkness of the tomb not being that, but of the womb.
Yeah.
Gorgeous image.
I'm going to breathe a little bit. I've seen it at least a dozen times, so my ability to react is probably a little better than yours, because I know the first time I saw it, I wept for a long time. Not in sadness, but at the sheer power of her witness is quite amazing. So one of the things that I really am passionate about is her description, and I've had some correspondence back and forth about her changing the word enemy to opponents. And that's a very deliberate choice on her part. Most North Americans, we feel, oh, I don't have enemies. But the word opponent, someone who opposes you, someone who isn't working for your best interests, someone who politically you're opposed to, we all have really easy connections to that word opponent. So I think there is some wisdom in using it. But she uses three different directions. She uses love for the other, love for opponents, and love for oneself. And in our tradition, we also have love for God. And I'm taking a page out of Brian McLaren here, but I'm adding not just God to the equation. And some of you will notice that in the bulletins. I think it's very important that we have love for one and for the other. We have love for our opponents, but I also think we need to have love for the earth. And I think that's crucial. And we're going to say more about that as this series goes on. And in loving the other, the opponents, the earth, and ourselves, we are thereby loving God. Because as some of us have learned from Brian McLaren, that if you don't see the divine in the other, or you don't see the divine in your opponents, or you don't see the divine in the earth, or you don't see the divine in yourself, you can't possibly love the divine. Nor can you love all of these things. I think it's really important for us to expand our notion of love. Now, Valarie has a kind of interesting approach. She comes up with her strategies. See no stranger, tend the wound, and breathe and push. So I guess what I want to focus on this morning is, and we're going to come back to these themes over the next few weeks, but what I want to focus on right now is loving our opponents. Do you have strategies that you employ to love your opponents?
No.
No? I love an honest person. That's wonderful.
Well, not to mention any particular names, but when I think of one particular leader of a nation, I've identified several shortcomings, and I pray regularly for humility and restraint, discernment and integrity, and empathy and charity. remembering that every time I say you need it, there are 3 more fingers pointing back at me.
It's beautiful.
So I could use those 2.
Yes. And I think that's that whole notion of tending the wound. Right? I mean, I think we may be thinking of a similar leader. And I find that almost impossible to listen for his story.
Yeah.
And to find out what wounded him so badly that he can be in the world the way he is in the world. And we're using this because it's an easy one. We have other leaders that are closer to home that we could use this for as well. But also people in our lives. How do we listen for their story?
Well, what I try to do again, I'm not going to name any names here, but I had an experience a couple of months ago where someone treated me in a way that I thought was incredibly disrespectful. And I was very upset initially and kind of stood up a little bit, and it didn't really help the situation. And went away, debriefed with my partner, and what helps me to get past the how dare they treat me that way, I don't really want to be around this person anymore, is first of all to realize that, well, I felt bullied, and that part of my anger and part of my rage in the moment, something happened in the moment that shouldn't have happened. It was disrespectful, but a part of my upset about it goes way back to having been bullied as a child. So if I can step back a little bit and say, okay, yeah, it shouldn't have happened, but I was this mad, but maybe I could have been only this mad at the person. That's step 1. And I guess that's acknowledging whatever was going on in me. And then, of course, a little harder sometimes, well, I wonder what's going on in that person's life that made them so crabby and, you know, whatever, and not seeing what I was trying to say. And then, if I can find that place of openness to what their story might have been, it makes it easier not to stay in the place of resentment and anger. However, it still hurts. And there's some repair needing. Understanding why the person did what they did doesn't solve it for me. So
I like her phrase, tend the wound. And she elaborates that isn't necessarily healing the wound. The wound is still there.
One strategy I use when I'm with people who I know are far from what I believe is don't state your own beliefs, but just ask questions. Question after question after question, so that they begin to see themselves in a way, and maybe you begin to see them in a way as well.
Yeah. Fran?
I love what you said, Valarie, thank you. I think one of the things that really struck me this morning, I canceled my newspaper subscription for a little while, the paper, because I'm going to try online, although it might never work for me. Anyway, I got left a copy of the National Post, which I'm just going to say I'll probably never subscribe to. But on it, there was this SNC Lavalin thing, like page after page after page after page, and I was struck by societies and our collective desire to see downfall, and to leave everything else that's positive, push it away, and only focus on this negative thing, day after day after day. Newspaper article, you know, and I was horrified. I was really horrified by it. I thought to myself, this is so awful that we're just focusing on that. When, you know, Did they give press to the fact that, we have 12 years to save the planet? No. They gave like a little blurb here and a little blurb there. But nothing like this negative energy, and I just am horrified by it.
I have a friend who says energy, and that's what reminded me, Grant. The whole idea of what you put out into the universe. So if you're putting out negative thoughts and negative vibes, then it multiplies. But if you can change it to something positive, and I know every time I rant, she always says, positive, positive. I believe that. I think that energy just keeps going out.
I think it's a beautiful sentiment, and I really, really like it. But I cringe sometimes in the same way as she talked in the video about cringing when people say love is the answer, because I know lots of people who live by that, giving out positive energy, and nothing but crap comes their way. And so we need to, I love the sentiment, and there are times when it absolutely is the most perfect thing to do in a situation. But sometimes there needs to be the rage and the negativity to tend the wound. And so many, particularly women, have been told to find the positive in the negative. And so we stuff all that stuff down. I loved her line about this is a feminist intervention. And yes, we have to somehow find a way to redeem. So that sort of a kind of Christian word for find the positive, to redeem the situation. And yes, that's necessary, but it took you some time. And it took her 15 years to make that call. And so staying with that wound, that woundedness, in all its negativity, and not moving too quickly to give out the positive. Because you notice, and this is a particular metaphor for the Sikhs, which might be a bit jarring for those of us who are of a pacifist bent. Sikhs are generally pacifists too, but pacifist doesn't mean passive. And so when she talked about picking up the sword, it's a metaphor within that tradition of standing with the oppressed, of being prepared to lose your life for the other. And that's part of it. But sometimes it's too easy to move away from the wound, or to put some kind of salve on the wound in hopes that it will sort of cover over the pain. And sometimes I liked her, I've never given birth, so those of you who have, that pushing metaphor, pushing through the pain, the wisdom of the midwife, right? Pushing through the pain. Which means, I think, and you guys help me, does that mean experiencing the pain fully, pushing through it, right? It's not pushing it away. It's through it. Yes, Sharon.
I took the whole tend the wound the other way. So I'm glad that people pointed out that it's tending the wound in yourself, because I took it as tending the wound in your opponent.
I think it's both. I think it's both and. It's not an either or thing. Yeah, I think it's both and.
But to what Lawrence was saying about asking questions and hearing what they have to say, and hoping that you will see them differently and they will see themselves differently. That only works to me if you've already tended the wound in yourself, because if you haven't, I know from experience that I try to do that, I get wounded more. Because I hear what they say, hear where it's coming from, and where it's coming from, and then wounds me more.
And I think that we need to be careful not to equate tending the wound to solving or healing the wound. She was very clear about that. And I think that when she talks about exposing oneself to further wounding, she's not shying away from that. And that's the hard part, right? So I would imagine that in the story that you shared with us, you continue to tend the wound. It's not over and done with. That's an ongoing process. it's tending the wound is paying attention to it, recognizing that it's there, learning from it. But we have this sort of modern North American notion. I mean, we use it in death, for example. We use the word closure. Oh, everybody's got to get closure. Well, no, nobody's ever going to get closure. That was a crazy construct that we created. We're wounded forever. This wound is there. The bullying that happens to us when we're children is forever. The kinds of hatred that she faced as a child in her story, that's forever. The man who killed her uncle, the murderer, that wound is there forever. Right? Even though they're able to forgive, it's not forgotten. The wound is still there. And it's in our woundedness that, Henry Nouwen he talks about the wounded healer. Like, it's the wounded ones. When widows embrace, they tend the wounds in one another without words sometimes, because they recognize the wound. It's not going away. And there's some healing.
The result of the push, you have finally done it, you finally succeeded, you finally proved that you could do it.
Mm-hmm.
And all these people said, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. But you did it, and you are satisfied.
Yes. And with
That's
that,
what the push to me.
yeah, that's wonderful. And this whole notion of the push, and you've finally done it, and you accomplished it, and there's great joy in that accomplishment. But then it begins, right? Then the whole work of this new life begins. The pushing doesn't get you to completion. It's you complete one part, rejoice in that completion, rejoice in that accomplishment.
But you did.
Yeah, like when she made the phone call. She made the phone call. She never thought she could do that. She made the phone call. And that's not the end of it. She's still wounded. She's still got to keep pushing. And she talks about this love piece as a daily choice.
But you can do it.
Yes.
You don't have to sit back and, oh.
Yeah. And there's sometimes time for that, though. While we're tending the wound, sometimes weeping is all we can do. You wanted to say something? No?
I was going to say that in my story, the tending the wound is both for my wound.
Yes.
And also being open to understanding the wound in the other. And in being able to do that, it creates a shared space in which something different, might be able to happen. And I always thought that I was a counselor for a good part of my career, doing short-term EAP counseling. And some of what I lived as a child, having been raised by a severely manic-depressive, bipolar mother, much as I suffered, yes, the wounds were with me, but the wounds enabled me to be I think I was a pretty good counselor. And I know that there was redemption in being able to use some of my own insights that I gained over the years to actually be of service to my client. The other thing I wanted to mention about what she said was about the breathe and push. What I loved was that she was, even though in the labor it's more individual, she was talking about breathing and pushing in communities, which I think is absolutely crucial for change agents. Otherwise, the burnout rate is astronomical.
Yes.
I can't let a good birth metaphor go by.
No. It's good to have a midwife with us.
I love that piece about community because actually in the birth process, two things are happening. There's the oxytocin that's kind of coming, but then there's the adrenaline that's coming. And we can actually work, and this is one of the magic things of being a birth attendant, is in that moment of transition. I love that metaphor because unanimously, if you're in a hospital and there's a laboring person, and she's been maybe hollering or maybe been quiet, there'll be a point in that transition where 9 times out of 10 the words that come out of her mouth are, I can't do this anymore, I'm gonna die, this is gonna kill me, this is gonna break me down, somebody else do it. And you just hear all ears perk up. Anyone that's seen more than a couple births goes, oh, it's happening, the new thing's coming. And I'll kind of show up in the room, but there's that point where she's saying, I'm gonna die. And then there are 2 routes that can happen in that point, where the body can open if it has good support and it has good community. So when those people hop to, when they hear that cry of like, that new thing is gonna happen soon, when they hop to and they're there to give the support, then the oxytocin can take over and the thing can come more easily. And if she's ignored in that moment and the community doesn't hop to, it's more difficult. So I love that metaphor of both allowing ourselves to say like, this work is done and I'm tired and I can't do activism anymore, I can't do the part that I'm passionate about anymore. And being able to hear that in each other and show up for each other that way. And then the second piece that I think about honoring your opponent is, I used to work, I'm a social worker, so before doing birth work, I used to work with perpetrators of domestic violence. And I remember my mentor saying, like, just going to her and saying, like, I cannot find any good thing. I just can't land on any good thing with this person in this room who is not showing remorse and all these things. And my mentor, who's with this really tough, like super street smart worker, she said, well, he was a baby once. And I was like, okay, so on hard days I'd show up in the room and I'd go, I'm a baby and he's a baby. And it would be this moment of like compassion for that need that was coming up in me, like you say, in that moment of like, there's more to this response to this person than just this interaction. And then also having compassion for like that is a need in that person.
Yeah.
But that is both simultaneously.
Your idea about asking lots of questions, yours is about being attentive and listening for when the new thing is going to happen and hearing other people's story. Sometimes that's really so much more difficult than just going, oh, I can't stand that person, I don't want to know a thing about them, I'm tired, I'm done. And I think for me, it's when I get to that place, it's community that helps me to see it differently. It's community that, I love what she said about, like you, Fred, you'll take care of my son when I'm not there to do it, right? So when I can't love this person or when I can't advocate for this cause, you guys will do it, right? Like, until I can come back into it. But that whole listening and being attentive for that is powerful when it happens in community. So the love of our opponents and making these kinds of strategies, I think, is challenging, especially when you think that it has to be done over and over and over again. I love the metaphor of love as sweet labor, a choice that you have to make over and over again. The wisdom of seeing no stranger, even that horrible abuser, shares your humanity. They were a baby, you were a baby, right? So see no stranger. Tend the wound. Tend the wound. Breathe and push. And the final point that she made that I found really powerful is this joy piece. The image of her son encouraging her to dance. I have a really busy week this week coming up, and I deliberately scheduled in the middle of this busy week for our daughter to bring our granddaughters to the house for 2.5 days to stop me so that I will play with the little girls. And tending to that joy in the midst of all the work, of all the stuff you have to do, finding ways to bring joy to the surface is crucial. Because in the joy, we see the darkness through new eyes. I love the questions that you highlighted. What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What new thing is about to be born? What if our future is not dead, but waiting to be born?